So I'm just going to do a quick introduction of Dominique and Kumbirai. They are both artists and practitioners. Dominique is based in Marseille currently, and Kumbirai, you're in London? In Sheffield? London, yeah. And rather than reading out their bios, I thought I would let Kumbirai and Dominique introduce themselves a little bit, talk a little bit about their work and practices. And yeah, maybe Kumbirai, would you like to go first?
No, I'll go first, yeah. So hi, my name is Kumbirai, as already described. I'm an artist based in London. My work has mainly been digital in the past. It's mainly taken the shape of moving image works and digital experiences. And in terms of my work usually just explores kind of the intangible kind of feelings that I feel like I'm processing and trying to give language to, which are usually inspired by Blackness specifically, or my experiences through Blackness, and also just in terms of existing as a queer Black individual. And in terms of where my ideas are kind of at the moment, I'm really inspired by wanderlust and this idea of traveling to kind of find connection, and also self-bettering, and just trying to actualize parts of myself and try and find abundance within nothing.
Thank you, Kumbirai. And just out of curiosity, the background that you've got there, is that your own work?
Oh no.
Because I know your work is digitally based and
it's just Minecraft. My work kind of deals with digital landscapes, existing on the internet, and so I find it kind of funny that I position myself in a digital landscape.
Thank you, Kumbirai. Yeah, Dominique.
Hello, I'm Dominique White. I live in Marseille, which is a recent move, but I work in quite a nomadic way at the moment, as Sunshine knows. My work mostly manifests as large-scale sculpture, so presenting drawings is something very new for me. And a lot of my work is based on a concept I call the shipwreck, or the shipwrecked, which is a reflexive verb, or like a redefined noun, derived from the idea that Blackness was born on the ship. So the wrecking is this, it's this forcing of the ship to become unstable or to destroy itself and expand beyond the current confines of Blackness. Yeah, and this research, as I said, manifests as large-scale sculpture, which tends to destroy itself a little bit in that kind of way. It's quite hard to explain without showing or like seeing it in real life. Yeah.
Yes, and again, even though I know that's not your work, it's interesting that you've chosen that image of the sea, because we've been talking so much about dredging from the bottom of the sea as part of your practice. So thank you so much for both for quickly introducing yourselves. Maybe a good way to kind of start the conversation and lead into it is to talk a little bit about the questions that we were discussing right before we let everyone in. We just marked a few kind of anchor points that Dominique and Kumbirai will be kind of circling around for the rest of the conversation. It might take a few tangents and might come back in again. So a couple of things that we were talking about right before everyone came in is the manifesting of the uncontainable, that is Blackness and this sort of shipwrecking idea, and how that might take physical shape. And of course, a lot of your sculptures, Dominique, are about the sort of uncontaining in some way. So maybe that's a question we can start with. And the other that Kumbirai posed was, what do you do when you don't know? And what do you do when you can't? Which is a very big question. I'll leave that over to you anyway, because I'm sure there's a way that you're going to be kind of shaping that and bringing it back into some sort of shape. So thank you both. I'll come back again. I'll turn off my video, but I'll come back again shortly before the question and answer at the end. So bye for now.
Thank you, Sunshine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess yeah, as a background, we've previously been talking in different capacities online about, yeah, where do we go from here, but also more specifically about, yeah, Blackness, I guess, and how that manifests in our ideas of the future and our work as well, or like, you know, whether we can even call it work. I think that's something I'm really interested in hearing from you, because I use work in like obviously just like a generic way, but a lot of the time I actually call the sculptures bodies in like in a plural kind of non-quantifiable like form, because I also like to let the work or the bodies do what they want to do, hence why sometimes they destroy themselves a little bit or consume the space.
Sorry, can you phrase the question?
I'm curious as to whether you call like your videos or your digital works even work, or whether they have like a different form or a different term that you prefer to use.
I kind of think of my works as exercises. I find it really helpful to think of them as me testing out specific things or trying something new out. I felt my works are usually a process of me kind of having a feeling or having something that at the time I don't think I have the language to describe or define. And so my practice is a way of kind of processing that and kind of giving shape to that. And I think sometimes like in the past, I have kind of made 3 consecutive works that have kind of discussed the exact same thing, but I think I've done it differently. It's been like a different process. I've kind of tackled it differently. I've kind of taken language that I kind of developed from the last work and then be able to put that use and even expanded upon that. And I find it helpful to kind of not think of works as finished things. I don't like the finality of it. And I kind of like this idea of it feeling as if I'm working towards something that might not ever exist, but there's always something better, let's say, that's going to be coming after it. And I think it kind of goes along with my personal ethos of self-bettering and self-evolution and constantly trying to push myself.
So almost like, as I said to you, like in a previous email, exercises, but also like exercising like a feeling or like a spirit or like a moment, essentially. You're manifesting that, yeah, it may just be like notes that can always develop, or, you know, this manifestation could change. Yeah, I kind of, yeah, decay it, or, well, decay in whatever form that is, whether that's like literal, like literally like it's disappearing, or like rotting, or in like digital terms, whether it's glitching or it no longer functions or it's unreadable. Yeah, I think these are all, for me, like really interesting terms to talk about in relation to ideas of like Blackness, but also this like it's not intangibility, but I see like it's like an abstraction of futurity as well, like this kind of, yeah, unreadable, glitching, mutable nature of like these manifestations.
I think for me, I'm really interested in I don't know, I feel like throughout my life, I've always kind of, in a way, this kind of goes alongside the idea of a glitch, but I've always felt like a prototype. And I feel like I felt a bit like a glitch or something that in a way, because I think a glitch in a way is only a glitch because of our perspective towards it. But well, for example, my work's usually quite digital. Sometimes I find glitches really fascinating because in a way, this computer, that's something that I'm supposed to control, is kind of acting out on its own in a way. I find it really interesting. It's kind of like it's demanding to be heard in a way, or like there's like a crack within something and it's like its essence or whatever it's trying to articulate is kind of like seeping through, and the only way it can do that is within this like glitch. And I find that really, really interesting, especially as computers, these things are very logical. They're supposed to like ABC, XYZ. It's supposed to be very linear and very like chronological and supposed to be set. And then when it misbehaves, I find it really fascinating where it's like you need to feel betrayed by it. And I kind of see myself as that in the sense like kind of going against the grain and also just kind of like demanding to be heard in a way. It's kind of like you are a glitch. And I think also in relation to like the intangible and trying to give form to these, I think with feeling like a prototype, I feel like I have to put these things out into the world, and for no one's sake in a way, but my own, and not in a like a very like, how do you call it? Not in an egotistical way, but it just feels as if I need to put that out there for it to exist, so that if someone comes after me similar to me, they can maybe have that as something else that's there. And I think that also leads to futurity as well.
So kind of like relics, you're
Yeah.
saying. You're leaving like a trail of relics of like, almost like storytelling. You're like, this is what has happened and or what will happen. And you need to pick up my crumbs essentially. And
I think it's, yeah, I feel like it is like that. And I think there's also this feeling of, and I explain it, kind of, I feel like I'm constantly dealing with like somewhat of a lack of history. I really struggle to connect with most documented histories. And I feel like for individuals like me, in whatever context that you can place that within, I feel like I struggle to connect histories that feel very, very connected to me as a being with all the aspects of my identity. And so it kind of feels like I have to create that history or kind of begin to allow that to happen. And also, I think it's nice that I'm doing it myself instead of allowing other people to do it as well. Yeah,
that's what I mean. Like it's not a rewriting of history. You're writing, I guess, like history that has been like eradicated or deleted or forgotten or like forcefully, etc. Yeah, it's carving this new space, and as you said, yeah, leaving new relics for whatever future may appear or may not appear. Who knows? Like, yeah, I don't know. I quite like this. Me and Sunshine have spoken about it briefly. This kind of grammatical sense of a futurity. I can't remember what we settled on. The actual grammar term is, but it's for like a future that is already happening.
Yeah, it's we were looking at future, like conditionals. And I think it was, we were looking at that Tina Count quote that was, if something happens, then this will happen. Something like that. It was like the future real versus the future unreal. And the future real is one in which like it has to happen.
Yeah.
I think that's what she was heading towards.
Yeah. So, thank you. Yeah, I was like, I couldn't quite remember like what the term was, but I quite like this this like firm statement where I'm basically saying, I don't know how we're going to get to this future, but I'm telling you now, like, this is going to end essentially. Like, not as in like, oh my God, I'm going to die, but as in like, no, like this like kind of whatever the fuck this is will have ended. I don't know how we're going to get there, but yeah. And I think, yeah, maybe I work in a similar way with the sculptures acting as these relics of like, sometimes they're almost like an alternative dimension, because I'm like, these are like battle flags that have like survived and been dredged up from the bottom of the sea. But at the same time, they've never been in water, because if you put my work back in water, they disappear or become invisible to our eye, kind of thing. Yeah, but then I guess this goes back to like what I was talking about, the shipwrecked and this kind of, yeah, blackness, yeah, being completely uncontainable and just seeping out into everything and perhaps consuming everything. That's why it has to be, well, that's why there is the attempt to contain it. But yeah, as I said, the ship is, yeah, shaking.
That does remind me of something, actually. So I feel like I have one of these things where like I feel like I'm connected to artists and I don't know what it is. I just have to follow it at times. I think I had that with your practice. But something that comes to mind is that I had like a moment where I was really drawn to Ima Bassi Okon's practice. There was just something. And for her show, I think she did it at Chisenhale. She explored this idea of like tarrying, this idea of like waiting for something to happen and kind of just being present and kind of just like that very long waiting, just being present, not knowing what's going to happen, but just there. I think it's not necessarily waiting, because sometimes if you wait, like you wait in a queue, you know what the definitive end of that is. There's this just like waiting, and I think the biggest element of it is hope.
Yeah.
And in her practice, she talks a lot about hope as a practice. Not hope as a practice, no, hope as a technology. And I think that's what it is in a way. And I think technology is technology. I wouldn't think about it in a very like modern way, but maybe technology is a tool. And I think that's what's kind of coming up to me within that moment. Yeah, I don't know if you have anything to say in relation to that, but it just jumped out to me.
Well, I'm just kind of thinking about like how, if you were saying there's no definitive end, it's this like in-betweenness, as we were just talking about before this call started, how like you're kind of constantly in limbo, because there doesn't seem to have been a start and there doesn't seem to have been an end. You just seem to just be experiencing this, whatever this is. I don't even want to call it the present, because it's like the present is already the past. It's like just experiencing time. Yeah. But then I guess like being a glitch in that is like breaking outside of that, perhaps.
Yeah, maybe so, but I think it's also residing in between. And maybe I think there's, I don't know, I've been trying to like think of like in-betweenness, not necessarily as a feeling, but more so a position. And it's like when I was studying, I've always had this idea, I constantly think about it. Like I think about it at least once a month. And I've never actually like really tapped into it, but it's just an idea that I've always had. I've always been fascinated by gradients. For example, if you have a gradient from white to black, like if you're going from one side to the other, at what point do you go from being one color to the other? Like kind of just like in this in between where you're neither one or the other, but you are something of your own within that. And I think there's something about in betweenness that sometimes feels like it has to be, it feels transitional, as if it's going, or it has to become one or the other. But there's something I'm finding really helpful of kind of like never being definitive, and kind of having the opportunity, not opportunity, but kind of like the possibility is there to become something else, but then there's sometimes like an active decision not to, but also maybe a helpful thing that you never do. And I think that's what I feel like the Blackness I find so helpful in terms of kind of not defining it. With my practice, I like to think of it as very fluid and constantly in flux and constantly changing shape, which I think is a manifestation of this in-betweenness. It's like, it's never staying to being one or the other, but there's hope that it can become one thing or the other. And it can maybe potentially be everything all at the same time, whilst not being one single thing either. And so, yeah, I think you also have very interesting, like similar ideas in relation to like defining Blackness.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to ask you then, because you were talking about like one thing or the other. Do you see it as just like a two-stop binary, or do you see it as like there is something here, and like if we're in the middle somewhere, but like, you know, you could destroy that ending and like go towards like whatever is like another, and destroy that, just like keep constantly mutating, and shifting. Yeah,
I think it is that. I think because obviously I thought about the gradient thing when I was studying, which I wasn't that small back then, which is funny. But I think for me, I'm now seeing it as a very like, I wouldn't call it rhizomatic, but there's just something about like non-linear, and there's I'm personally very much related it to my personal life, and kind of this idea of constantly trying to find a direction. And I feel like there's always this feeling as if I kind of need to know the end goal to kind of know where I am right now. But at the same time, I've really just trying to become very present. I kind of feel like maybe life is going to be for me this process of like having stations, and that in itself is an in-betweenness, and there's so fluidity to that that I think will allow me to do some form of course correction. I'm not destined for one thing specifically. And I feel like I get to kind of claim the power of that for myself. So I don't think it's binary at all. I think the gradient analogy obviously does frame it like that. But I think it's this possibility. I think what it does is it opens up to kind of it being able to become anything. And that becoming anything feels very inclusive. It feels very hopeful to me. And it's this, I feel like it's one of those things where I don't know what future I'm dreaming up, but I know that the future that I will dream up can change if I want it to. And I'm also very aware that I personally think of things and become very set on them. And then when I realize that I get there and I realize I don't want that thing, it's like, where do I go from now? But I feel like if I frame it in the sense that I'm always going to be changing these things, kind of seeing myself all my life, basically everything is fluid. What can go wrong if I can change something? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think you're answering one of your questions, like when you were basically asking like what comes next, or like what do you do when you don't know what to do. It's actually not having that definitive question in the first place, because you're just doing. It's like, for example, like the way that I approach when I'm like, okay, I just open a show, like what do I do now? And it's like, well, resting is doing something, or I don't know, destroying something in the studio is also doing something. It doesn't have to, as you were saying, be this like polished outcome, or like I don't have to be like, okay, this is how it's going to look. When the fluidity is actually the most exciting part in both living and also making. I'm quite accustomed to, it's rare for people to actually like see me work, because I think a lot of people will be horrified by my process. But then there's very few people that have ever seen me work. Like my gallerist is one of them, and he was just like, what? He'd like come in and I've like built this like really giant, huge structure, and then 20 minutes later he'll come in and he'll be like, is that the same work? And I'm like, yeah, and like holding like shears and scissors basically, and I've just like severed the whole thing and tied it back together. And that kind of fluidity. In the same way that, talking about the future, it's like, I know one thing is certain, but then like how that ending will look, or like what comes after that ending is like completely, unknown.
There's always something that comes after. Something beautiful about that.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, that's, I guess that's like, kind of how my research goes. And I think last time I briefly spoke about Busta Rhymes, and it's like, he's never, in like his like early like 2000s, like he never like fully paints this new world. He's just like, this is how we're going to overturn everything, and everything's on fire, and I'm wearing a great outfit, but like everything's on fire and it's the end. It's all in ruins, but like I haven't said what comes next, basically.
I think that's helpful though. I think there's hesitation for people to kind of like allow things to pass, because they just don't know what's going to happen afterwards. And I think sometimes you do need that space, or that not knowing, because it allows something new to come out of it. But in relation to that, I actually, did you manage to, I'm going to ask you a question that you feel free to think on. I don't think you ever got round to it. But in terms of like this fluidity and kind of not knowing where to go next, also with this like in-betweenness and kind of like being in this position and kind of like choosing a path and all these kind of things. When it comes to decision making, have you managed to kind of think about how you feel about that loss that's made within decisions? And to enlighten everyone else in the group chat, I had like a month ago, I was talking to my therapist, and she was spitting. She like brought up a few interesting notes, and she said that within every decision there is a loss, and sometimes you're aware of it, and sometimes you're not, because the stakes are very different. But basically, when you make a decision, there's a literal loss of something or the potential loss of something. And I was just wondering how some people reconcile with these losses, specifically of potential things. for example, within my practice, I never really consider the loss of, what's it called? The loss of the potential. So I make a very specific decision. I don't think about the fact that if I'd gone in another direction, that work could have been something else. It's like, I know it and I feel it. I was just wondering, have you ever had to reconcile that kind of loss, or do you?
Yes, definitely. Like in terms of work, for example, like some of the sketches in the show are of works that will never come to be. And so, and as I said to you, like sometimes that's just like quite practical things. They're like too expensive to make, or they're like, I don't know, 40 meters tall, or they're literally like physically impossible because like they just, yeah, they can't work. But sometimes they're actually loaded with like a certain moment, or they're loaded with like a certain thinking. And sometimes I think that moment has like passed, if that makes any sense. Like I think, because that's for me, that is like how I work. It's like, these are actually just like, as I said, exercises that I'm like exercising the soul kind of thing. I think that's why like works are so emotional, because they are so loaded with that. But yeah, there's some that will never fabricate or manifest for that reason, because I'm just like, yeah, that's how I kind of deal with that loss. Or there is an old work of mine that I actually made in response to like losing someone, and the work purposely will never be repaired for that reason. And I quite like this idea that when it eventually destroys itself, that's when I'll kind of feel free from that as well. I don't know, that was a slightly different answer to like a slightly different question, but yeah, I mean, loss is like multiple definitions. Yeah,
of course. I think there's so many different layers to it, and I think I'm also very aware of loss, or specifically potential loss, when it comes to the context in which I make work. I'm not actually making work, but it kind of turns it on its head, and kind of goes back to the futurity, which also kind of links to Black quantum futurism, but I'll get to that. And also I'll get something after that as well. But basically, I feel like within my work, it feels like I make very large decisions because I feel like I'm very scared of the loss of something. I think that loss is my work not existing. But I do think that one's a very heavy one, because I think sometimes I do have to sit back and be like, who am I making this work for? Because I feel like I'm currently in this midst of making a work that should be made but isn't made. And I don't know if I want to make it anymore, because something about it doesn't feel like I should make it yet. I don't know. And the thing is that I'm like in this weird thing of like, I'm scared of the potential loss of that work not coming to life, but at the same time, I'm kind of okay with that work not being there because there's something about it. But the reason why I'm bringing that in is because in relation to futurity, these decisions are really important, because Black quantum futurism, I think I've told you about this as well, about, because Black quantum futurism have theory about collapsing space-time into specific or desired futures, and they have specific strategies or methodologies of doing this. And one of them is like future envisioning, which is where you kind of see patterns with that happening at the moment. Also, you look at patterns that happened in the past, so you can spot them happening in the present, and then that way you can, in a way, predict the future or see the future. And I think a part of that is decision making, and this loss does kind of come into it, because I think you do kind of have to reconcile the loss of a potential, but also the loss of the thing that you might want to do for something else. That sounds a bit convoluted, but I hope it kind of got through.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think whether I do it actively though when I make work. I think I allow so much fluidity. I'm just, because this is what I mean about like the afterlife of work. I feel like I'm like the mediator, where I'm just like, oh, okay, I've brought like this Frankenstein to life. Now you can do whatever you want. you know, like you can you can threaten the audience, you can tower over, you can sometimes snap. I've had works snap, which has been fun. Works change, and it's something that you can't fight, because I mean, this was like, actually maybe that is the decision. The decision is that the materials that I've used, you can't battle with them. Essentially, you can negotiate. Like, as Sunshine and David have maybe learned, you can negotiate with the kaolin clay, but ultimately it will win. You're going to be finding that for a while. Yeah, or even, you know, like, for example, the iron that I use, I choose to not coat it in anything. So eventually it has the potential to completely snap as well. I don't actually know why I do that, actually. The more I think about that, I'm like, God, it's absolutely like bizarre. Like, I'm so hell-bent on making works.
Not everything you thought about. I think just go with it. If that's what your body's been told, go with that.
Yeah. It makes sense to me to make works like that, or to, like, as I said, to exercise in that way.
Something quite beautiful about that. I think it's like, I think there seems to be this thing of like letting go, and kind of maybe somewhat of like a purging, or like a getting rid of, but not in like a how can I describe it? Not in a disregarding kind of way, not in the terms that I literally just like get away, but more like a thing of, it seems like a very beautiful process of like transference and kind of literally physically kind of giving, where like it's like purging through giving form, which I find very beautiful. But I do have another question for you.
Oh yeah.
Actually, it's not a question, it's more of a prompt.
Okay.
Kind of taking it back to Blackness, which I don't know if I've told you about this. In relation to like the our similarities in terms of thinking about the fluidity. I'm at the moment, I don't know if it's a transitional period, but I think I read this book by Michelle M. Wright called Blackness. In relation to the fluidity, she posed it in a very interesting way, which still kind of has the fluidity, but in a very different way. She says that blackness isn't a what, but it's when and where. And I was wondering if that means anything to you. I obviously have read the book, so I know what it's like.
But is this the same book that you sent me like a video of?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I think you need to get the book.
Okay, I'll add that to like my ongoing reading list. But yeah, because I think this is why I don't have trouble defining it, because I don't think you can define it. But this is why I'm always hesitant to call it like blackness an entity or like a singularity, because I think there is, for me, it's just like, it's so intangible that, interestingly, aware and awareness. Quite interesting.
Yeah.
I never thought of it like that,
It's really interesting. It's because I was really, the beginning of my practice, I was very much interested in kind of like, and the things that, it's really funny because when I first started, I didn't think it was that futile of a exploration. I felt like I was going to get there, but it was kind of doomed from the day one. But I was really interested in this, like, I felt like there was like a perception of blackness as one-dimensional, and I was really advocating for its multi-dimensionality. And I feel like there was definitions existing that just weren't very helpful. And so I was given a quest in a way to kind of find this definition of blackness that is fully inclusive. And it can't be done. It can't. I had a beautiful journey, like looking through it. And Michelle Wright really kind of gave me an embrace. Reading her book was like a hug, because she talked about how blackness can be defined, but it will never be wholly, like fully inclusive. But blackness can be defined in specific space times. And because of that, Blackness will always be a where and when, but it will never be a what, because it will never be the same thing at one moment and at one place. It will never be the same thing at all times and all places at the same time. And I find that really beautiful in a way. And also kind of takes it like, it gives it a whole other dimensionality, because then it literally, when it becomes a what and when, what matter does that even have? And also like, yeah, like how do we even like
grapple with?
That's the only action I can think of, but like, what do you actually do with this? And I found that really helpful, and I think it really hit home, because then it took me to the whole thing of like wanderlust, and I feel like I've always felt this desire to travel, to find connection, and I think this where and when is like, I feel like I've constantly been traveling in my own personal life to kind of find that where and when. And I think I've always been like, I've been really interested in this like concepts of like anatopisms and anachronisms, of like things existing in the wrong time and things existing in the wrong location. And you're like wanderlust to kind of travel, to kind of find these positions and these times, or these like space times. I think that was a lot, but
no, but I'm really curious, because I'm now remembering parts of like basically like I guess it was like an essay that she was recounting, or just like her thoughts, and she was basically saying I think what her idea of time I found particularly pressing, because when she talks about like the past, present, and future being fake, and time can only exist as entropy, that's kind of how I see Blackness, as like it's not like it's just like a vessel it's leaking, it's just this unquantifiable. So when you say like a where and a when, I'm wondering actually like whether it's just always and everywhere. I don't know whether there's like a that's the first. Okay, I'll add that to my shopping list. Yeah, I'm wondering whether like Blackness is like similar to time actually, and it's just yeah, that's the only way that you can kind of understand it almost.
Yeah. I think it's yeah, I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is, but like physics and quantum physics is like, there's something about that language that is really helping me personally. Obsessed with times and paradoxes and the languages of those, because I think one thing I do love about quantum physics is that there is like some form of like hope in. I think there's something I find it kind of interesting. It's like it's really this like, to me, I'm always fascinated by what's it called, dichotomy, not dichotomies, but kind of like these things that there's like blurring between the two, kind of like science and magic, or science and material, and kind of just like what like are the two kind of the same thing but just perceived differently? Is science just magic that has language and actually has become defined in a way? And is magic the opposite? And the things that I feel like that's what it kind of is with quantum physics. And I think it feels very much like quantified, defined, and classified ethereality in a way. Like I've been very fascinated by at the moment, my new work, Anatopia, is very much dealing with like black holes and traversing through them, and like so they've been able to travel through space-time, and like inspired by wanderlust. And I find it interesting that when I go to quantum physics, these things that in a way sound very magical, it's like very much backed up to an extent by science, and so it becomes very much real. And I find that really beautiful, and I find it very, very gorgeous.
But don't you just essentially think it's all magical, if that makes sense? Because as you were saying, yeah, it's like when someone, I don't know, writes out the theory for something, I'm like, this is just essentially magic. It's like, how do you power a car with like these certain materials or certain tools in like a certain configuration? makes a car move, or like certain things like launching a rocket into space. Like, as you said, to a certain point, there is like fact, but like even like fact is just, yeah, now we're getting like way too deep. Like, everything is fake.
But no, but I think I am happy with this not knowing. I feel like my whole life has been filled with these things of not knowing. For example, I grew up very religious, and after stepping away from it, it's like that thing of like you can't take the church out of the person. And so I do believe in like these like borderline spiritual and magical things. I'm only saying that because I do find it's a difference between spirituality and religion, and also just believing in something other. It's like the same thing with like my parents kind of having like our older family in Zimbabwe practiced ancestral, I don't call it ancestral worship, but just kind of spiritual practices in terms of connecting to ancestors, and then they went to religion, specifically Christianity. I do find that all of these things kind of become conflated. I'm happy with them just kind of all being things that kind of have the different perspectives on the same thing. So I'm kind of happy with them all kind of becoming not known. That fluidity again kind of comes into it. But yes.
But yeah, I quite prefer that as like going back to, I guess, like this notion of storytelling, or like, for example, like for me, like the shipwrecked, or like this potential nation of perhaps souls, or like living people that live in the Atlantic kind of thing. It's like, for example, with Christianity, we've just not necessarily elected it as fact, but like we've just pointed at something and said, well, we're going to go with that one instead of this one kind of thing. Yeah, that's what I was just kind of just thinking about. And also, yeah, thinking about where is that book? Have you read, out of curiosity, have you read Undrowned by Alexis Pauline Gumbs? Because I think you might find something like that interesting, where she's basically talking about like Black feminist theory, but in relation to marine animals. And how like she's like essentially like, yeah, positioning Blackness as like a similar realm to like the magic of whales and dolphins, and how like, for example, like certain species have gone extinct, but that's because we just can't see them anymore, when they could just kind of be living, or like, we just like elected it as fact that they no longer exist when they kind of do, kind of thing. Yeah, that's kind of what I was just thinking about.
I'm not going to take us down this tangent, but I'm very much interested in this idea of like facts. And I hate being this person that's like very like, oh, but there's something about facts that I don't really like at times, because I think I like this idea of always being open to being wrong. That's something that facts do not have. And I'm always very fascinated by what's it called? By human error. And the fact that I feel like we do it in some things, but I think it gets to a point where I feel like people just genuinely do not think about it anymore. And I find that really fascinating. But there's a thing about facts where I think that thing of, also this kind of goes to this whole idea of being a prototype and kind of like this glitching. But this is what I was trying to get to earlier with glitches, is just the fact that when you have facts, when something comes that contradicts it, because you have these concrete facts, that thing in terms is classed as a glitch. But what if that's actually the natural order of things, and maybe the systems that have been created actually should be acknowledged and kind of cause these facts to then shift. I think, of course, they look at history of like science and be like, yeah, like this theory like dumbfounded this theory of this and all this kind of stuff. But I just feel like that thing's not happening anymore, and I find that really interesting. And I think you find it happening on a very domestic scale, something very close to home, specifically in relation to identities, looking at how intersex individuals really do open up everything about gender. But yet they will not change and they will not shift. And I think what it is maybe is that maybe my life in a way is a process of reconciling being a fluid within very solid structures that are not willing to shift. maybe that's at the core of this. Like, where do we go from here? Maybe it's like a process of like, I don't know what that process is called, but kind of turning solids to liquids. I would call, well, not everything can melt, but I guess it's a process of like, I guess I'm melting things. I'm slowly like melting whatever is around me.
But could you also like describe it as like glitching the system on such a scale that it essentially corrupts the whole system and is no longer deemed readable kind of thing?
Yeah, but also I would like to say emphasize glitch in a very non-digital context.
No, but I mean, like, I think glitch and the way corrupting a system can also be applied to multiple things. I'm not talking about, just a computer system or something like that. I'm just, perhaps using that language to explain.
Yeah, because I think it's just like the word glitch is so, what's it called? Anomaly.
Yeah.
I love
like, oh.
I love when I think of the right word. But yes, I think this question of like, where do we go from here? I think we'll never really answer this question, will we? I can see like in a few years, part 15. These are all like very interesting points, and I think they are taking us down a specific route, and it's nice to have like a travel partner in a way whilst answering.
But I think also it's like, I think it's just to continue doing what we do and not speculating and actually just starting to craft where we're going. As you were saying, like, that can always change, but like, keep moving essentially. Yeah. The end.
It's all flat. It's just been really, really interesting trying to follow the flow of the conversation. It does feel like a flow, like the way you've been trying to grasp onto and yet failing to, but then kind of also getting to notions of Blackness and your practices and the ways that you've been thinking about your work and outside of your work as well, just more experientially, just trying to make sense of situations that you encounter in life and so on. And something that was brought up in the chat here, maybe I can read out to you, is a question from David. Are right and wrong the only possibilities? I'm thinking of deconstruction and the breaking down of the hierarchy of binary oppositions. I felt in some way you kind of addressed that with the idea of fluidity and also, sorry, I didn't mean to answer for you, but there is something in what you were saying earlier, Kumbirai, about human error that I also thought was really interesting. That is not necessarily, you're in the midst of also trying to describe, like when Dominique was also kind of asking you about this notion of binary, the spectrum, but you're also veering away from this notion of spectrum too, weren't you?
I think, so I actually have two things I can say about that. In my practice, I personally do not like to specifically define things or kind of draw conclusions on things. I always try to do this thing of offering alternatives or just dreaming up something other, because I think I really do not like the idea of binaries and definitive things, because it personally scares me in a way. And I think in relation to this like right or wrong thing, I remember growing up, I was really into like superhero films, and I grew up, my parents watched a lot of like action films, and I was always really fascinated by villains that were always deemed to be completely villainous, and they had no motives. They were literally just like purely bad for no reason. And I remember there being a shift within how villains started being dreamt up. I think it happened a few years ago, I can't remember when, but I think a very good example was Thanos within the Avengers Endgame, and how this idea of like being bad from his perspective, but also that person that's technically being bad is being good within that specific context. And I think once you only deal with the binaries, you can't connect the two, and they kind of can't coexist. And that's how things kind of go wrong, because you are so defined with it.
Mhm.
And so I don't think right or wrong. I think I can't answer that question, but I don't think they're always fully exclusive. I think they're binaries that technically maybe can exist, but I think there's something so fruitful that happens when things aren't fully right and things aren't fully wrong. And I think they bring up a need for us to kind of redefine how we deal with specific things in order to kind of be able to deal with situations better.
Mhm.
And that's all I can say on that, I think.
Yeah, I think, I think in a similar way, I don't think they're the only two outcomes. I think the goalposts also shift. Even if like there were two outcomes, it's like it's constantly shifting. So I don't know how you could even call it like a binary, if that makes sense. Yeah, I think it's always shifting. Like even if like a moral compass or something. Yeah, it's not fixed. I ever see. So yeah, my brief answers to that. Yeah.
Yeah, even the idea and the notion, both and instead of and exactly. It's almost like the generosity of both and allows you to think not just beyond them, because beyond also assumes that there's already these like layers, and then beyond that there's more. So it's like there's something also about today's conversation where you're really trying to find a more precise language. That and the struggle of that has been really, really interesting and great to watch. I don't mean that the struggle itself, but like but landing on words and seeing the excitement as well. Like, oh yeah, that's it, anomaly, or oh yeah, black holes.
Yeah.
It's a very palpable doing against, that's not the right word, again, like these prepositions are not doing us a favor. But like but yeah, it's almost like you're trying to find like something that encompasses everything, all the contradictions and everything at the same timeness, of what seems to be for both of you is so slippery about Blackness, is so slippery about is what you're trying to get across in your practice. So I was wondering, actually, there was something you mentioned earlier, Kumbirai, about the precision and the love that you're of physics that you're finding at the moment. Is there anything in particular perhaps that you can share with us in that because you mentioned black holes and traversing as well, that's kind of resonating with you right now?
Yes. So interesting enough, actually, this kind of takes on from what you're just saying about language. A big thing in my practice is that I like to kind of shapeshift, and I think my language and also the kind of subjects that I explore kind of shifts a lot. Sometimes work to work, sometimes not. But at the core of my practice, the idea of like, because of that, I constantly create languages to kind of describe these things. I don't know if it's helpful for people that try to follow my practice and trying to find something chronological that flows out all of them. Maybe there's an essence, but there's this idea of like creating languages and kind of finding things that kind of allow for me to attach this feeling onto and kind of lay that bare in a very digestible way. I studied art direction, so essentially communication design. So at the core of my practice is this idea of like very specific conveying, and I think these languages allow me to do that very clearly. And physics at the moment is part of that. And at the moment, I'm very fascinated with wormholes and black holes. I'm very fascinated by black holes are these voids that are just like there's just nothing in there, and you kind of, I think, just goes nothing can escape. but also wormholes as these kind of portals to somewhere other. And I'm working on a new work called Anatopia, which takes from the word anatopism, which means something in the wrong geographical location. And so I think I specified earlier on about this feeling of wanderlust, of wanting to travel, wanting to find this kind of find Blackness within the right space-time that I feel very connected to. There's this desire to travel, to find that. And so what I'm really fascinated by is the fact that from appearances, black holes and wormholes look exactly the same. You just never know until you're actually inside of it. And I'm very fascinated by this desire to travel is something that I feel like I don't really have control over. It's like deeply rooted within me. I can't escape in a way. And once you get to the horizon of a black hole or a wormhole, there's a point where you can't escape it. That's just, and it's nearly like a forced travel. And so I'm really fascinated by black holes and wormholes and the horizon of the wormholes and spaghettification that happens at that position as a language for this kind of like travel, potentially to nothing and potentially to something. There's a certain hope. Did I kind of go to this black hole specifically by my own accord, or did I just happen to be there and I'm just forced to go to wherever this is going to take me? And so I think it's that within physics that really has really drawn me, but also I'm interested in time and the idea of entangled particles being able to communicate or travel through different dimensions, and also time travel as well. There's a lot of stuff in there, but it's a really interesting language that's very tangible. And I like the fact that as an artist, sometimes you have to make decisions where it's like, this is what I'm saying. Like, for example, I've created this fictional world. It has to be this, where kind of like, I don't have to do that. I don't have to make those decisions this time, or kind of like try to world build in somewhat like build a world that kind of makes sense. It's like all the sense is kind of there, and I can create a new narrative based on these facts that already exist. And I find that really helpful.
Thank you so much. That's really, really fascinating, the idea of wormholes and black holes, even the language in itself, like the worm, how it, I don't really know exactly what a wormhole is, except that you can go from one place to another, yet at the same time.
I can explain if it's easier. So
go on then.
Just to help, so basically a wormhole is when space-time folds. For example, imagine space-time, it folds, and then it connects two different locations within space-time. And so it allows you to travel, it's basically like shortcuts through space. They've done tests that can prove they exist, but they've never actually found any. And obviously they know that black holes exist, but you can never know if a wormhole exists because no one has been through it. No one can actually survive going through it. I find that kind of hope that there is something at the other side. Like technically, scientifically, transport to the other side is possible for something, potentially not a human in like its natural state, but it's something that has been scientifically proven is possible. And I find that really beautiful.
But I'm so intrigued by this now, because what's to say a black hole isn't a wormhole and the nothingness is just something that we can't perceive or measure?
Yeah.
Like if they're saying that they've never encountered a natural wormhole, but they're like, they have to exist. Like we've calculated that it has to exist with like this slightly factual, slightly magical understanding of how the universe works. But I'm like, yeah, what if the nothingness is the other side? And
you just go to the singularity. So a wormhole all leads to a black hole all leads to one point. So basically, I'm not sure about the specifics of it, but it just like nothing can escape it, and then it's like a void. It's like it's like a nothingness. I'm
like, guess what I'm doing tonight on YouTube?
It's really good. It's really good.
People do go down YouTube black holes.
That would be me tonight. Like,
we'll be going down one literally as well. I actually have another question for Dominique, but we only have 5 minutes left. So I just wanted to make sure I'm covering I'm letting people ask any questions as well. If you feel like it, you can also, because we're not that many people, if you want to turn on your video and ask Dominique or Kumbirai a question, please feel free. So we have a few minutes to do that. If nobody asks anything, then I will go ahead. Okay, I'll ask. I was just thinking about the name of our show, Dominique, or your show at Bloc, Becoming Fugitive State, and how Kumbirai earlier was talking about wanderlust and fugitivity, and this sort of, there's this theme of moving and the fluidity. It just seems like there's a momentum constantly that we're trying to give shape to in different ways. Do you see fugitivity in some way related to Kumbirai's notion of wanderlust? Or, I mean, your works are obviously very different, and there's a certain kind of optimism in Kumbirai's work that might not be as apparent in your work, for instance. It's, so yeah, maybe you can talk a little bit about this notion of fugitivity, perhaps.
I think in that particular context, I see fugitivity as like fungible fugitivity. So like there isn't, as we were talking about earlier, there isn't like a specific or definitive outcome as to what that state is, or like what we're going towards. That's how I always see this becoming a fugitive state. It's like this becoming intangible, becoming unreadable kind of. This is why I was just quite intrigued by this idea of nothingness, and like perception perhaps, or like this like reading. Yeah, that's kind of how I see fugitivity. It's not just like this endless running. It's actually, or disappearing. None of those words quite fit, if you know what I mean. It's like this.
No.
It's almost like, yeah, we recognize that you're there, but not what you are, kind of thing. In the same way that I was just talking about, like the Undrowned book, and how they kind of are like, well, we kind of know something is at the bottom of the sea, but we don't know what it is, and it's not something that we understand. Oh my God, I love Sandra so much. Thank you for that comment. Yeah, I think that's like my answer to that.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Is Kumbirai, can I just ask, is SONW the actual name of the book? Yeah. It's not short for something. Okay.
I remember. Shadow of a New World. Shadow of the New World.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
Incredible.
We will be saving the chat, by the way. So I will.
I would love that. Yeah.
Yeah, so if anybody tonight attending wants to have a copy of the text in the chat, please just put it in the chat and let us know, and we'll make sure to email you a copy before after the event. But yeah, I think I'm just gonna end it there, because it's like, you know, Thursday evening, and I feel quite full from all the amazing input from both of you, Dominique and Kumbirai. So thank you so much for giving us your time tonight. Thank you also to all the attendees who have joined us for the last hour and a bit. Yeah, just let us know if you would like a copy of the chat, and we'll send it to you if you're interested. But yeah, thank you everyone, and yeah, have a very good evening. Dominique and Kumbirai, if you don't mind just staying for a couple of minutes with me and David, and we'll just kind of like check in with you before we completely log off. I just find it so weird to log off. For everybody else, thanks for coming. And
thank you.
have a lovely evening.